After more than 2 decades of Korvac studies, perhaps it is time for a retrospective, a celebration of the impressive body of work that we have created. The earliest known study of Korvac is Colton Waugh's The Korvac. Some contemporary scholars dismiss this work as a hoax, pointing out that it was supposedly written decades before the character was created. On the other hand, when studying a cyborg turned god who dies centuries before he was born, perhaps you should be willing to accept a time paradox now and then. M. Thomas Inge is generally acknowledged as the godfather of Korvac studies. It must have raised some eyebrows when this distinguished Blackwell professor of English and Humanities made a dramatic shift from writing monographs on Faulkner to working on a book about the Korvac saga. Inge was the first to argue that these comic book stories, dismissed at the time as crude and banal, were in fact an insightful critique of American culture. Some of the most significant early work was done by comics creators. Korvac had not been created when Stan Lee tried to entice Will Eisner to take over the editorial reins of Marvel Comics, or surely Eisner would have jumped at the chance to guide the destiny of the malevolent Machine Man. However, years later, Eisner was given permission to make extensive use of the character in Korvac and Sequential Art, a how-to manual for aspiring Korvac writers and artists. Eisner famously demonstrated expressive anatomy with his short story, Korvac on a Rooftop. Scott McCloud's great frustration as a cartoonist was that he could never convince Marvel editors to give him a chance to write Korvac. His only recourse was to become a scholar and help us all to have a better understanding of the Machine Man turned god. McCloud's Pyramid of Korvacs is still one of the clearest explanations of the ever-changing visual representations of Korvac. Perhaps the most dramatic and controversial episode in the history of Korvac studies was when Gary Groth revealed that Jim Shooter's version of Michael Korvac was based on an actual person, a man who, in the journal interview, was so self-aggrandizing that it was easy to see how he could have been the inspiration for a godlike comic book villain. Of course, we can debate whether Korvac was actually a villain, but it is undeniable that Korvac stories contain a great deal of violence and sexuality. Amy Nyberg examined the public outcry, the political posturing, and the proposed Korvac code that sought to neuter future narratives. No one realized the true extent of Korvac scholarship until the publication of John Lent's massive annotated bibliography. After years of tireless travel and research, Lent discovered the Korvac saga had actually been studied by cultures across the globe before it was fully appreciated here in its native land. This revelation prompted Lent to found the International Journal of Korvac Art. The journal helped unify Korvac studies and encouraged many young scholars to enter the field. Of course, Korvac studies was growing too rapidly to be contained in a single journal, even one the size of the Manhattan phone book. Older scholars, please explain phone books to the grad students. In recent years, a number of other quality publications have emerged. As mentioned earlier, there's a strong sexual element in Korvac stories. Tim Pilcher and Gene Cannonberg Jr. conducted a risque tour of cyborg sensuality, passion beyond the petty bonds of morality, and the tightest little green shorts ever worn by a godlike being. Cannonberg also undertook the Herculean task of summarizing and reviewing the 500 most essential Korvac stories. With so many great Korvac narratives to study, Matt Smith and I had independently decided it was time for a textbook to support an Introduction to Korvac Studies course. Luckily, rather than being competitors, Matt and I worked together to produce The Power of Comics. Shameless plug, look for the second edition in 2013. As scholars from other fields were drawn to Korvac studies, they brought with them interesting new perspectives. Jason Tondreau found elements of Arthurian legend in the Korvac saga. A. David Lewis and Christine Hoff-Kramer explored the spiritual dimensions of Korvac's ascension to godhood and his eventual martyrdom at the hand of the Avengers. Berninger, Eck, and Haberkorn harkened back to Inge's early study of Korvac and culture, but with a 21st century spin that places Korvac at the nexus of interdisciplinary, transmediated, convergent culture. Mark Singer opens his book by pointing out that Grant Morrison has never officially written a Korvac story. Yet by the time Singer completes his explication of Morrison's oeuvre and reveals how to read the subtext of each work, it becomes clear that Morrison only writes Korvac stories. Andrei Mirlotu revealed a little-known subculture of non-narrative comics featuring Korvac. Andrei's efforts earned him an Eisner Award nomination. This year, for the first time, the Eisner Awards have a category to specifically recognize academic work. And okay, I know what you're thinking about why I'm mentioning the Eisner Awards. But really, it's because Korvak scholars have dominated this first year of the academic Eisners. Let's take a look at the nominees. First, Ivan Brunetti. I'm still not sure if Korvaking is a lifestyle or just a new dance craze, but you certainly have to admire any scholar who does his work at postage stamp size. Of course, Matt and I owe our nomination to the 21 talented scholars who contributed chapters to Critical Approaches to Korvak. And my God, is my nose really that big? Look at that thing. That's Jimmy Durante big. Let's move on to a more handsome nominee. Jared Gardner got the attention of the Eisner judges with his bold claim that Jim Shooter's epic tale influenced so many future writers that the Korvak saga is the template for most 21st century narrative. Eric Berlatsky is a brave man because Alan Moore has undoubtedly been putting curses on him ever since Eric revealed that Moore does not worship a sock puppet snake, but has actually chosen Korvak as his personal deity and muse. According to Eric, all of Moore's plots are concocted through an imaginary, or is it real, dialogue with Korvak. It might seem that Charles Hatfield's Kirby book has nothing to do with Korvak, but we all know whose fiery hand that is on the cover. And even a neophyte Korvak scholar will soon discover that Hatfield is using the arc of Jack Kirby's career as an allegory for the rise and fall of Korvak. So all 5 of the nominees are standard bearers for Korvak studies, and their recognition is even more proof that Korvak might be dead, but Korvak studies is alive and well.